What do you got? Quarter horses. All right. Do they, are they performance horses? Do they just hang out with you? General riding horses. Okay. What about you, ma'am?
Just with the media.
Just for the media. All right. You got some horses? What do you do with them?
Trail riding, a little bit of showing.
Trail riding, showing. Okay. How about you guys? Bad horses got rid of them. So did I. I'm hoping to get some more soon, and then I'll start bringing too many, right? Yeah. I had some kids, so the horses had to go. How about you? Just two? What do you do with them? Trail riding. Okay. So my talk today is about choosing a concentrate to match your forage, and I needed kind of to know what you are doing with your horses, because if you all had elite race horses, I'd have to talk a little bit more about feeding elite race horses. So it sounds like you're more of the pleasure folks. What about you? Do you have horses?
Yeah.
What do you do with them?
Use mine on the dairy farms at Chicago.
So yours actually, they're work.
Well, she's not really.
No.
I bought the one time. We put 2.5 miles in the day's chore.
Okay.
So it's not really.
Okay. So what I'm going to do today is talk about choosing a concentrate. And I think when you go into a feed store, sometimes it can be quite overwhelming because some of them have 50 different concentrates to choose from, and you're trying to figure out which one is the best one to pick. So, I mean, I've often gotten faced with this, and I go, and I'm not really sure. So what I'm going to do today is try to talk about a balanced diet, and if you know what you're currently feeding your horse as far as forage, then you can then go out and match the concentrate to your horse's forage. So that's what we're going to do. So what is a balanced diet? I mean, I think we grew up learning a bit about human nutrition, and the same thing for us goes for the horse. We try to get the nutrients that we need to exist. And if we're doing, exercise, we need to take in more nutrients to support exercise. And if we're having children, we need to take in nutrients that are specifically for growing those babies. So with the horses, it's the same thing. One of the most important things that we need to give them is water. Energy is another important substrate that we need to make sure that they can create, basically, so they can do work. But energy in itself isn't a nutrient. Fats and carbohydrates are what we feed them so they can make energy and work on the farm or go on that trail ride for hours and hours. Protein, vitamins, and minerals, those are the other ones. So we're going to talk about those a little bit, and I'm not going to try to bore you too much. But these are the nutrients that we have to think about when we feed our horses, because we want to provide them with this balanced diet. So I got out the triangle. I'll bring up the rest of the triangle in just a minute, because when we grew up, we had a triangle. I think now they're a little bit fancier. I think they've gone away from the triangle with the, for feeding, or I shouldn't say feeding humans. We don't really talk like that, but for our diets anyway. But if you look here, and I'm not really sure which one is a pointer. It is the middle. Okay, I just couldn't see it. So here we have the bottom of the triangle, which is actually making up the majority of the horse's diet. So when I talk about concentrate, I usually talk about that last. I actually talk about forage first. So the two F's, forage first, because the bulk of the horse's diet is going to be forage. So we're going to feed horses, about 2 to 3% of their body weight in forage a day. So for the typical 1,100-pound mare or gelding, that's about 22 pounds of forage a day. So 22 pounds of hay. The rest of it can be made up as concentrate. So I hope one of the things that you take away from this talk today is that we actually are going to be spending more time on forage than concentrate. And you'll think, but I came here to hear about concentrate. But there's so, whatever you feed as far as concentrate depends so much on your forage that we have to spend a little bit more time on that. So this is kind of a fancy little chart that I borrowed from an equine nutritionist, but it gives you a good idea of, this is the percent here of the nutrient, how much of the diet it makes up, and these are some nutrients on the bottom here, and the red is the amount of nutrient that the forage provides, the yellow is the amount that concentrate provides, and then the blue is salt. So when you're feeding a horse forage, the forage provides a lot of nutrients, but it may not provide everything they need to have a balanced diet. So what this is showing you is the forage that you feed your horse, this is just one example, is likely to meet almost 100% concentrate. So when you feed concentrate, it brings it above the 100% or that balanced diet. Now, unfortunately, our forages are low in sodium and chloride, so a lot of times, most of the time, we have to feed a salt block, like sodium chloride block or loose salt. Some of us feed a mineral salt. I have a little bit of everything in one of the blocks that I buy. It has sodium chloride and it has some trace minerals. So I think that's a really good idea to always keep on hand for your horse. And we pretty much let them decide if they're hot and they've been sweating and they lose the salt in their sweat, they go lick the block. At least we hope so anyway. So the first step here in figuring out what concentrate you need is to actually go and look at your horse. Because your horse is going to tell you whether you're feeding enough, whether you need to feed more, feed less. So we're going to start with the horse. And pretty much how we base most of our approach to feeding horses is on their life stage and what are they doing. And I've already talked to most of you, and most of your horses sounds like mature horses that are doing some light work. So here we have a picture of a maintenance horse just hanging out, not doing too much, maybe going on a couple trail rides. We've got some horses that are in a lesson program. We've got a broodmare in early lactation with a foal, and we've got an elite athlete there. So does the maintenance horse need as much as the elite athlete? No. I mean, so you kind of have to figure out what am I asking my horse to do and how much should I be feeding. Another thing to consider is that the nutrient requirements are going to change with this physiological stage. So what I've shown you here are some physiological classes of life stages, like young, intensely exercised horses like the Kentucky Derby runners, early lactation mares, mature exercise horses, and it goes all the way down here to maintenance. So this young, intensely exercised horse, he has the highest energy and crude protein requirements. Those Kentucky Derby winners need a lot of energy and a lot more protein than, say, the maintenance horses here at the bottom. So that's why you have to know life stage. If you know your life stage, actually when you go into the feed store, and I'm probably just giving away my talk right here, but if you go in the feed store, most of their concentrates are packaged and designed by life stage. So you go in and you tell them, I've got a recreational horse, and you can go to the pleasure horse feed bag, and it's probably going to have a trail riding horse on it. They kind of designed it just for that purpose. So some of the vitamins and minerals that we worry about, I just mentioned crude protein and energy. Those are kind of the two main things we look at when we try to meet nutrient requirements for a horse. But then there's also the vitamins and minerals, and I can't spend too much time talking about all those, but we do worry a little bit more about A and E, because in fresh pasture those levels are very high, but in conserved forages like hay, they tend to decline, and over time when you leave your hay in storage, it declines even further, so we tend to be focused on those. Vitamin D, have any of you guys heard lately you're supposed to be taking vitamin D tablets so that, because vitamin D helps absorb calcium and also has these great immune benefits. So some people, in addition to going out in the sun and getting your vitamin D the old-fashioned way, are taking vitamin D supplements now. Minerals, we tend to focus on calcium and phosphorus, because if you don't feed enough calcium and you feed too much phosphorus, phosphorus impedes calcium absorption, and then you have bone problems. So for athletes, calcium to phosphorus is very important to consider. And you always want a 2-to-1 ratio, so more calcium than phosphorus. You can go up to, say, 6-to-1. Calcium and phosphorus, but what you don't want to do is have more phosphorus in the diet than calcium, because then you're going to have some abnormalities with your horse. Salt, already mentioned. Zinc and copper, also very important minerals that maybe for your recreational horses we don't tend to focus on too much, but for the broodmare that needs to create this foal with exceptionally correct conformation, we'll worry about zinc and copper. And then selenium. Sometimes selenium can be low in the soils, and then you may have some problems there. Other factors to consider: body weight of your horse. How many of you guys weigh your horses monthly? Anybody? No? Alright, we're a university and have some taxpayer dollars, so we have a scale. And we do weigh our horses monthly. Right, we're from Maryland, yeah. The governor just increases taxes all the time so we can buy our scales. That's terrible. We were just talking about that. But we have a scale, and we do measure them monthly because we need to know, are they losing weight, are they gaining weight, are the young foals gaining at the right pace. But for you guys that don't have the fancy scales like most people, you can use a weight tape. And a weight tape is something you can get at your local feed store. It was designed for light breed horses like Arabs, quarter horses, Oregons, less for draft horses, so it may not work that great for the big percherons, you know. But you wrap it around from the point of the wither all the way around the barrel, and it'll estimate weight of your horse. And it may not tell you that day, like, whether your horse is a ideal body weight, but over time, if you look at it over time, you can see a difference. If you're increasing the concentrate, for instance, in your horse's diet and they're gaining weight, you're doing a good job. If you change and make dietary changes and increase concentrate and they're losing weight, it's not looking good. So I would definitely encourage you every month to get your horse out and just do an estimate of its body weight and see how they're doing. Another thing we look at is body condition score on a horse, and that is estimating the fatness. Not necessarily like the muscle cover, because muscle can be pretty impressive on some horses. It's actually how they accrue and store fat. So this guy up here is a typical thoroughbred. If the screen was a little bigger, you could see his ribs, but it's kind of tiny, so you just have to trust him. And he might be a body condition score 4 out of 9. So he's thin, he's not emaciated, but he's thin. He's in race shape or competition shape. This guy down here, what do you think we should call him? Round, fleshy, right? Yeah, he has fat being stored on his neck, behind his shoulder, over his ribs, along his tail, or the back of the tail. So he is obese, I think I would call him at this point. That horse, does he need concentrate? Does he need grain? No, he needs to not have any grain in his diet. I can guarantee this guy up here, if he's an athletic horse, he's getting grain just to maintain him in that lean shape. And then special needs. The horse on the left is a laminitic pony, and the horse on the right is a geriatric horse. How many of you guys have either of those? Anyone have a laminitic horse or geriatric? Geriatric. We keep them around for a long time because we like them, you know? So if you have a geriatric horse, that's another concern, because they're kind of a special needs type of horse. So we can talk about that at the end. I know you can't see this, but there is something called the nutrient requirements of the horse. And they have an online program. This was put out in 2007. It's kind of like the Bible for horse nutrition. It's sort of all these really smart people got together and put together all the recommendations for feeding horses. But they have this online program, so if you really do want to figure out exactly what your horse is going to be needing as far as energy and crude protein and minerals, you can check this out. You just have to put in and nutrient requirements of the horse, 2007, and it'll come up. So I'm going to get out of technical stuff. And now we're going to get into forage quality so I can get to the concentrate stuff. So you really need to feed your horse a good quality forage diet because they need that for their gastrointestinal system to function properly. Did any of you guys hear Dr. Standier's talk earlier about fiber? They got to have fiber because their gastrointestinal tract won't work properly. You run the risk of certain digestive problems, which I'll mention. But the horse is raised for millions of years, so they've evolved with this really small stomach, and they're used to eating small meals. So that's what we do. We feed them hay. Hopefully they kind of eat it over the course of the day. I'm sure you have the ones that eat it in about 8 minutes, and they look at you like I'm starving. They're like, well, you should pace yourself. So they'll eat about 14 to 18 hours a day. So what we do is we focus a lot on forage because they need it to prevent colic and gastric upset and that sort of thing. They need at least 1.5% of their body weight in forage a day. So even though I know we're focusing on concentrate, you have to make sure they're eating enough grain. I'll tell you this story. I was at a farm and their horses were all thin, and they asked me to come out to my nutrition background, and I looked, and yes, their body condition scores were pretty low. There were 3s and 4s out of 9, so they were pretty ribby. And they asked me about the grain, and we talked about their grain. And then as it turned out, it was summertime, and I looked at the pasture, and there wasn't much pasture because we were in a drought, and they'd eaten it all. And I said, well, what are you feeding us hay? Because I'm the forage lady. And they said, well, we aren't. And I'm like, well, you know there's like no pasture left, right? And they didn't think about that. They know wintertime you feed hay, but usually in summer they're all grass. So I had to get them to think about the forage first, and then, but they got to have that forage in their diet. So at least 1.5%. If you get less than 1.5%, what you do is you get problems with colic or digestive upsets, gastric ulcers, where they have these eroded spots in their stomach because there's too much acid in the gut and not enough fiber to buffer that acid. Laminitis, which is a really painful hoof condition, and then stereotypical behaviors. Horses that are on high-grain diets and low forage diets will tend to bite. If they're in this barn, they're going to bite on that wood. They're going to bite on fences, pace, so they'll develop more stereotypical problems like cribbing and that sort of thing. Alright, so the forage, you have to go out and now look at your horse's diet and say, what am I giving them in forage? You have pasture, probably right now pasture is abundant. We've had so much rain, it's like horses are getting so fat on the pasture. But we have bluegrass, orchard grass, ryegrass, fescue, and clovers. For hay around here, we probably have more timothy, orchard grass, maybe some reed canary grass. I know that's growing in popularity on the East Coast, and alfalfa. I want to talk a little bit about the quality of forage, because that affects your concentrate. So what this picture is showing you is the composition, the relative value, and growth stages. So what I'm going to show you really is that when the plant is immature, we have grass on the left and a legume on the right, like alfalfa. So let's picture orchard grass on the left and alfalfa right here. When it's immature, we have very high levels of energy and protein and vitamins and minerals. We call that vegetative. So horses love vegetative or freshly growing little bits of grass. If you see, they'll have this tall grass in the back of the field and you have the little guys in the front and they just keep hitting it. Because it's high in starches, it tastes better. Most of our nutrition is in the leaves too, you got to consider that. Well, that's a whole other issue. But as the plant grows, so our grasses are getting taller, they're actually going to start producing seed heads or flowers. As the plant grows, the protein concentration declines, minerals go down, and actually fiber goes up. Because as the plant grows, the stems become more and more of the larger part of the plant, and our fiber goes up. So what that means for you guys, if you're feeding either pasture hay that's more immature, it's on the left side of that chart, you don't need a lot of grain because they're going to be getting high energy, high protein, really good quality stuff. If you're feeding a hay, like you see a full seed head orchard grass, you see a full seed head timothy, it's kind of yellow in appearance because it was very mature, very aged, very tall when they cut it for hay, then you probably need more grain because that hay is going to have less nutrients, less crude protein, less vitamins and minerals. So really, you have to think about forage from a stage of growth perspective. If it's immature, green, leafy, good stuff, less grain. If it's mature, stemmy, you're going to have to feed more grain. I'm going to not spend too much time on this stuff, but pasture, I have to tell people, pasture really does have value. A lot of people put horses out on the pasture just to run around, but they forget it really is nutrition. And I know some of the competition folks, they really look at pasture just as an exercise lot. They don't care about the horses getting nutrition because they have more on grain. But for a lot of us who don't have a lot of money to spend, you can feed a horse with pasture. It's like a third of what it would cost to feed, hay and grain. So utilize your pasture for nutrition. It has protein in it. This is an average concentration of a grass pasture, like an orchard grass pasture. About 15% protein. That's more protein than most horses require in their diet. Most horses are in the, probably 10 to 12 range. It has a good amount of fiber. This is neutral detergent fiber. That's just, the structural components, the woody components of that plant. It's got starches, sugars, so it's got the carbohydrates, fat. A lot of people don't even know that pasture has fat in it, but it does. Minerals like calcium and phosphorus, and a digestible energy about 1 megacal per pound. Most of the time when you're feeding horses and you're thinking about how much energy that's providing them, your diet should have at least 1 megacal per pound. A diet for a broodmare who's producing gallons and gallons of milk should be higher than that. So our broodmares can't usually just have pasture meet their requirements, and we know that, and I'll talk to you about that too. But that just gives you an idea of the value of pasture. It's a really good forage. And that's why I want to talk about the pasture side of things, because if you have a really good pasture, you don't really need that much grain. I will tell you though, when I was sort of raised in grass said that horses could meet all their requirements with pasture alone. But now that I have more pasture horses and I'm utilizing my pasture, I'm realizing that's not entirely true. And I think some of the problems that I find are maybe calcium might be low, zinc and copper are low. So I'm going to talk about forage testing. It is a good idea to see what your pastures have in them. Are they low in some of these minerals? So you can test for that, and I'll tell you about that. But we've got our pregnant mare here. That's the type of horse, a life stage that requires more grain. Our foal, young growing animal, our exercising horse. So forage, basic forage diet is not always going to meet your horse's requirements. So how do you really know what your hay or what your pasture is as far as quality? There is a hay show going on, and I know they're judging hay, and one of the things they do is they physically look at it and visually assess it, and they give it some scores. Dr. Boat's down there doing that. But for you, when you look at your hay, what's the first thing you do when you look at your hay to decide if it's good or bad? Color. So is color number one on that scoring sheet? How many points does color get if you're going to assess hay? 20. So what this does is prioritize the importance of what you should be looking at as far as how it relates to quality. So stage and maturity is number 1, it gets 30 points. Leafiness number 2, 20. Color is still up there, it's good for 20 points. If you add up the different points for odor and condition and form material, that gets you to 100. You don't really need to score your hay, but I wanted to just show you that the hay guys actually do assign points. So one thing besides color that you want to look at, really the first thing, is the stage of maturity. So I showed you that picture with the little guys and then the full seed heads on the right. If you see seed heads, you know it's mature. You know it was allowed to grow quite tall. It's high in fiber compared to the immature with no seed heads. So that's the first thing you need to look at. Leafiness is highly related to stage of maturity. I kind of don't really separate them out. If it's less mature, it's tending to be more leafy because it didn't grow a seed yet. But leafiness, you can almost tell right away, or you can feel it. If it's soft and feels good to you, it's usually leafy. If it's very stemmy and coarse, it's going to be less quality. It's going to be lower in energy and protein. So getting back to color, that's the big thing. When I grew up, I always looked at color. You want, what color? Green. Yeah. So I have some hays here. I mean, that's a pretty green hay. I also have another hay. What do you notice the difference between those two hays? Because they're both green, so they must be good. But which one do you think might be better than the other? The top or the bottom? Top? The top. Why do you say the top? No seed heads, right? Yeah, so this is a Timothy because you can see the seed head. But it's green, it looks leafy. But I bet you that orchard grass is going to test higher and be a higher quality because it was less mature when it was cut. It's going to have higher protein, higher energy, less fiber. So the stage of maturity you got right away. Leafiness, we'd have to feel it. Really look at colors, great. Odor and condition. Sometimes horses won't eat it. It doesn't matter how great it tests out at chemically. They smell something, they don't eat it. And so a lot of people do call me and tell me, I got this hay shipment in, my horses won't eat it. And I have to go out and it might be an odor thing. They might have used a preservative or something that the horses don't like. And then form material. How many of you guys have ever found like a snake skin or a dead mouse? You gotta look at form material. That's low, but still, you don't want to be feeding your horse anything because horses don't throw up. So whatever goes down is gonna get through the horse's gut and really cause some problems. So what I'm trying to do is we got you a little bit thinking visually. Now we have to also send it off chemically. If you really want to know and really feed your horses well, you got to send off your hay samples. If you guys get hay twice a year, you put it up in your hay loft and you feed out the same hay, it's really worth sending it in for a sample. You take a long hay cord that's attached to your drill, which most guys love to use a power drill anyway. Some of the students we have love it too. So you get up there and you sample at least 10 bales. And what you do is you take your drill and drill in the end, so the smaller part of the square bale you drill through horizontally. And then you mix all the samples up that you got, send it off to a lab. We use either Eco-Analytical, I should say Eco-Analytical, or Cumberland Valley, but there's a ton of certified forage labs that you can pick your own. And then when you get it back, a report, it actually tells you how much protein, how much energy. So I do this all the time at the university because our lesson horses need a good concentrate matched to the forage. And I didn't do it initially, and we had a hay crop come in, and it was about 7% protein. The horses started to look terrible. Their spines were prominent. Their muscles weren't looking that great. It's because we had too low of a grain to match the low protein hay that we got in. So now I always test, and if our hay comes back low protein, I have to change the grain and get a higher protein grain. I know you can't see that, so don't even worry about it. But it'll give you a nice test report, and then you know how your hay is. So the trick, though, is if you're a racehorse owner, which I know you guys aren't, or if you go to a hay auction, however, every month and get smaller batches of hay, if you're feeding it out too fast to really make sense, it won't make sense as far as getting your hay tested. You've already fed it out before the test comes back. So that's kind of a limit. So all you have is your visual assessment. So look at maturity first. Alright, just to give you an idea, alfalfa is like, high in crude protein, high in energy. It's great stuff. Some people are afraid to feed it to horses, but it really has a great purpose for horses, especially geriatric horse. The starved horse who needs to be refed slowly. The horse with gastric ulcers, it's good stuff. But it's high in digestible energy, lower in fiber, it's more leafy. High in crude protein, higher than what most horses need. High in calcium, high in phosphorus. So if you have a low phosphorus issue with your pasture, you can supplement with calcium or with alfalfa to bring up the calcium. Timothy alfalfa, your typical grasses here, they're lower in digestible energy than alfalfa, higher in fiber, lower in crude protein, lower in calcium and phosphorus. But those are pretty good hays too. Alright, so my point is you got to know about your forage before you go into the feed store. So I'm going to give you some tips on how to pick a concentrate. So arm putting your knowledge of what kind of quality forage you got, great pasture or good quality, or maybe, sometimes our hay dealer brings a certain hay, it's not a great quality, but that's all I've got, I'm stuck with it. Nobody else has any hay, that's what I have to work with, that's fine. So, I like to tell people to use a commercial mix. You can get fancy and make up your own, concentrates, but you're going to run the risk of making a mess out of it as far as having some imbalance or not putting the right ingredients in that horses like to eat. So, I recommend just going to the store, talk to the sales rep, talk to them initially and then say, okay, let me make up my mind, because sometimes they tend to hover and you can't make up your mind. But definitely understand that the feed companies have done the work for you. They go to all these research seminars. They've got everything specially fortified for the specific life stage of your horse. But I will tell you that if you have a lightly exercising horse like most of you guys, it doesn't mean you can't feed the senior feeds. Senior feeds are great for the geriatric horses, but they're also good for young growing horses. So you don't have to stick with one type of grain. If you read the feed tag, which we'll talk about, a lot of what is in a senior feed that's highly palatable, a lot of what's in there as far as the protein levels and the energy is what's in, senior feeds. It's really what's in an endurance horse feed. There's a lot of similarities. So don't be afraid to look at the feed tag. Definitely follow the feeding directions. They formulated the concentrates so that if they say to feed 4 pounds to your lightly exercising mare, feed the 4 pounds. If she's overweight, don't feed the 4 pounds. Now I'm telling you the right rule. But if your horse is overweight, probably not a good idea to feed at their recommended level. And then consider your budget. If you talk to some of the feed reps, they'll tell you the fancier the bag, if it has 7 colors on it, it's going to cost you, 50 cents more per bag. Just because you buy the plain brown bag that has the darker brown text, doesn't mean it's a worse quality feed, but you're paying less for that bag. So sometimes you have to buy things based on money. Sometimes. I do it all the time. I'm going to go to the store, I'm going to look at the feed tags, and I'm going to pick the cheaper concentrate. Or sometimes the premium feeds have a lot of probiotics and the fancier digestive enzymes, but if you just have a backyard mare, what do you need all that fancy stuff for? You're just paying for all the extra stuff. So definitely read the feed tag. Now this is a Southern States label. We happen to use them at the university because they give me a little discount. But anyone else that would like to talk to me, they usually will have a product name, so you know it's Grow and Win or Millennium Broodmare, or whatever the name is. It's also going to tell you what it's for. So this tiny line here is going to say, for use with pleasure horses, broodmares in early gestation, horses that are lightly worked. I mean, a lot of these will tell you that 5 different types of horses can have this one grain. So be aware of that. Don't feel like you just stick to one. It's going to give you guaranteed analysis. So if you know that your hay guy is just giving you some really stemmy hay and it's probably low in protein, look for the guaranteed analysis to look for 14% protein, something a little higher. They'll tell you the ingredients. Some people don't like diets made of corn. You know, maybe you want an oat. Look for the oats, look for whatever you want in there. And then the feeding directions, and then it'll have a lot of information like when it was made, so you know it wasn't made 2 years ago. So here's a diet of a maintenance horse. This is your average horse hanging out. Maybe it goes on some trail rides, but it's not really asked to do too much. Minimum requirements are 8% protein. And I know I'm flipping through these slides because I don't want to keep you here all day, but if you remember back to our hay, how much food protein was in our hay, most of it's higher than that. I will tell you, that pasture right out there is probably 18 to 22% food protein. So most of the pasture that your horse is consuming is higher in protein, so you don't need a high protein grain. 3% or 0.3% calcium, 0.2% phosphorus, and 1 megacal per pound of feed. And usually hays, for the most part, they're decent quality, will come back at 1 megacal digestible energy per pound. So just to give you an example, if you're feeding alfalfa, a really good quality grass hay, a good quality pasture, you're going to be giving them 16 to 18 pounds per day of forage, or a little bit more than that. Then you really don't need to feed concentrate. However, if you have more mature grass hay, full seed head timothy, orchard grass, very stemmy, then you might want to feed a little less hay and feed more concentrate. Because what a concentrate is, it's a concentrated amount of energy and other nutrients in a smaller amount. Because if you keep feeding this bulky hay diet, at some point the horse is going to become full and you can't actually eat more to meet the requirements. So you back off the bulky stuff and feed them this concentrate to help meet their nutrient requirements. Alright, so performance horses. Most of your horses, it sounds like, are maintenance horses or light work. I've kind of simplified this, but performance horses need a decent, like light work. Actually not much different than the maintenance horse. About 8% good protein, about similar calcium phosphorus levels of the maintenance horse, not much different. But if you look at horses in heavy work, like event horses, barrel racers, polo ponies, that's when really your quality of the diet has to get better. They have to have more protein, more calcium and phosphorus. I know you guys don't really have that type of horse, but that's when you really start to get into what kind of grain you're feeding. So here's an example. A light horse, if they're fed free choice hay, you know you guys, a lot of you have non-pasture, or you're feeding hay in a round bale feeder or something, and you're just throwing out all the hay. How much do they need in grain? A light work probably doesn't need any grain if he's on a really good pasture or good quality hay. Maybe a pound or so if he's in light work, he's doing some trail riding, if he's on a lesser quality hay. Medium work, about 3 pounds of grain on a good hay, about 5 pounds on a lesser quality hay. So you can see really at 9 pounds of grain, do you guys know how many pounds per scoop you guys have at home? How many of you guys have a nice little scoop for your grain? Do you know how many pounds it is per scoop? It does. And your scoop, right? So what I recommend, if you don't know how many pounds of grain you have per scoop, you can either buy a scale, those hanging scales, or you can cheat and you get out a Ziploc bag and you pour a scoop into a bag, and when you're at the grocery store, you just sort of use their scale and then put it back in your car. They don't mind too much. I mean, you're there to buy carrots for your horse anyway. So then you can tell how much your grain weighs. But you do need to know that, because if you're feeding 9 pounds, we typically run 2 pounds per scoop. So 9 pounds a day, that's like 2.5 scoops? No, 2.25 scoops. I have to do that. 2 pounds, another 2 pounds is 4 in the morning, another 4 in the evening would be 8, so you have to know a little bit more. And that's for some of these low-level event horses or jumpers, 4-H ponies, that's a pretty poundage per day that they're getting. All right, broodmares. Anybody have a broodmare? I've ignored this whole group. Hello, big group over there. It's good to see you. Is any broodmare owners over here? You have one.
No, I don't. But I had a question about earlier, talking about pounds for, this is kind of crazy, but I was watching the Secretariat with my kids.
Yeah.
And like he has a ulcer or something in his mouth, and he finally starts eating his grain. And the guy took in like 3 buckets full of grain. How much do those racehorses really eat before a race? Will they like spike them or no?
Yeah, well, he was saying he was watching Secretariat, and you know that part where he was off. He wasn't going to race really well, and she talked to him, and then he ended up having an ulcer. Yeah, I like that part. So racehorses. There's a lot going on with the racehorse. One of the things is they don't like to eat a lot. They're really kind of nervous, and they're also working really hard. So their energy requirements are really high. So a lot of times they'll have a big hay bag outside their stall, and they'll nibble all through the day. But they need a very small, concentrated amount of grain. I say small in volume, but they do eat a lot. So what we try to do with racehorse owners is teach them that anything over 4 to 5 pounds in one meal is going to hurt them from a digestive standpoint. It's going to cause ulcers, not oral ulcers like I think Secretariat had, but gastric ulcers, stomach ulcers. It's also going to increase risk of colic. So the elite racehorse owners, one thing they'll do is they give them their regular hay, but they also have a flake of alfalfa because it's higher in nutrients and energy. 1 flake in the morning, 1 flake in the evening. But then their grain, they'll have 3 to 4 meals a day. So with that Secretariat, back in the old day, they had buckets. They're a little smarter now. We have smaller buckets. We just give them a lunch, and then we give them a 10 o'clock meal too. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, 4, and then 10 o'clock.
Will they kind of spike them before a race though, or no?
No, before a race, they usually withhold their meal 8 hours now. It used to be kind of like 24, but now about 8 hours out from the race, they don't give them anything because they don't want that weight in their gut. They don't want to swallow that. So feeding the broodmare, let me just skip here and just talk about, I think I'm almost out of time, but for early gestation mares, they really don't need much else in their nutritional, or what you feed them per day compared to like a maintenance horse. If they're thin when you get them pregnant, sure, you need to push them a little harder with some energy and get them up in their body conditions. But if they look great, you don't feed them too different. So with a good quality hay, they really don't need any grain. Poor quality hay, they're going to get a little bit of grain. And then as you can see, late gestation, early lactation, they're going to start to increase quite a bit. At about 5 months of gestation, your mare is going to start to really give or partition a lot of energy to that foal. So at 5 months is when you start bumping her up just a little bit every month from there on out. So that at foaling, she has a little bit of fat on her, a little bit of energy reserves, because when lactation hits, she is just putting out a lot of energy to make milk for that foal, because that's the foal's nutrition. So you can see quite a lot of grain, even if you have a good quality hay or pasture, and quite a lot if you have less quality hay. Late lactation, things start to decline, the foal starts to nibble in pasture, maybe shares mom's grain, so you have to feed her less. And then special feeds for special needs. If you have a horse with a particular issue, you really should work with your veterinarian. You know, most people can go into the feed store, look at the life stages, compare the feed tag, pick up the grain, and have no problem. You know, if you have a laminitic horse, you got to worry about, is it because they're overweight, and if so, then no grain. You know? Or is it that they're very sensitive to carbohydrates, and you have to feed a low carbohydrate meal? Laminitic, that's tying up. Anyone have a horse that's tied up? It's very painful muscular for thoroughbreds, quarter horses. Well, they need a higher fat, lower starch grain. So you really should work with your vet on that. Polysaccharide storage myopathy. The carbohydrates are stored improperly in the muscle. They need a low starch diet too, because once it's stored, it's hard for them to utilize, and they have muscle problems. HYPP, hyperkalemic periodic paralysis, where they come in quarter horses. That's another condition. That's related to more high potassium levels, so you need a low potassium level. So anytime you have issues, work with your veterinarian, work with your extension specialist. Some of them have great backgrounds in nutrition, and they're going to help you go to more of the specialty nutrition folks that have more clinic design, but I think they're going to better meet your horse's needs. So some last kind of tips here. Stick to concentrates designed for horses. You don't want to think, well, I've got the sheep feed here, and I'll just throw it in the horse, because there could be some problems there. Toxicities for one. Some diets for cows have ionophores. These can kill horses if even a little bit hits that horse's body. Don't feed more than 5 pounds in one meal. So if you feed more than 5 pounds, you run the risk of colic and gastric upsets and problems. Make sure you think about it. If you are getting that really stemmy hay and you want to go pick a concentrate, I think it's a little cheaper to just improve the quality hay. Talk to different hay guys. Supplement with a little alfalfa, but improve the forage first before you spend so much money on grain, because it just keeps going up. Like the fuel costs affect bags of grain costs. It's so expensive. Don't feed more than 50% of the total diet as concentrate. So if you feed a couple flakes of hay and 15 pounds of grain, that's not good for the horse. So more hay, really, 60% minimum, I think, or even 75% should be in grass, forage, and a little bit of grain. And then don't feed grain to overweight horses. I always tell people, I have this overweight horse, and I say, what do you feed? They always tell me grain first. I really need my forage first. But they'll say, I feed this grain and this supplement. And they always mainly relate it to, well, I bring in everybody else to eat, and I feel bad. So this horse has to have grain too, but really they don't. They're overweight. Just look at them and say, I don't feed you because I love you. All right, so I'm happy to answer questions. I probably don't have that much time for questions, but I would love to answer any specific questions you guys have.
We have a jumper.
Okay.
Moderate to heavy. Anything special? I mean, she's getting enough breakfast.
Right.
And she's on the muscle, she's got a little bit of fat behind her shoulders, and that's solid. That's it.
She's solid. What do you mean? Like, do you feel like she's over, like fleshy?
She's under.
She's under.
Yeah.
All right. So she's out on pasture.
Yeah.
How would you rate the quality of your pasture? Like, is it growing all over the place, or is she nibbling it down?
She's with a couple of hairs, and it's like that.
Nibble down. Do you get hay right now?
She gets some hay and some water.
Okay. If you can try to supplement her forage, it sounds like she needs more forage maybe throughout the day, because if you have too many horses on a smaller acreage, they're not getting in. But what's your grain then? So I know the forage might be in.
It's a sweet pea. I don't know exactly. It's a low level.
Yeah, so take a look at the tag. Are you on a boarding farm? So you don't really control a lot about where's the feed room. Ask a little bit of the feed tag. See who it says it's for. It might just be for the maintenance source, but your horse is jumping a lot. So your horse, a performance horse, needs higher protein. And then how many scoops a day? You figure how many pounds? 2 to 3 cups? Like coffee cans?
Well, yeah, it's sweet.
Okay. My guess is with her she not sounding too overweight, thin, that she's being asked to do, I think you probably need to increase your forage quality. Maybe if they don't want to give her more hay, you guys might need to buy a really nice quality hay, or like an alfalfa, and just give her a flake in the morning, flake at night. See if that usually works for the athletic horses that are at boarding farms that don't really feed high quality stuff. Because that happens a lot. Yeah.